Dr. Elizabeth Turner had secretly conducted experiments in her laboratory for the past few months and had finally completed them. The excitement burning in her eyes demonstrated how important her achievement was. With the results of this experiment, aimed at bringing the dead back to life, she could potentially revolutionize the world of science. However, unfortunately, the results of the experiment didn't go as expected. A young assistant stood in front of the laboratory door, breathing excitedly while attempting to open it. However, he hadn't seen what was happening inside. Dr. Turner's eyes were focused on the data displayed on her computer screen. As she approached the conclusion of the experiment, she examined a series of test results. In the end, she realized that the graphs and data on the computer screen didn't show the desired outcomes. Elizabeth was disappointed. The experimental virus, instead of reviving the dead as she had hoped, had turned the bodies of the deceased into something else entirely, without even opening their eyes. These new creatures were something akin to the living dead. Suddenly, there was a loud crash at the laboratory door, and Elizabeth heard a scream. The assistant outside hadn't seen what was happening. Dr. Turner's eyes were locked onto the computer screen. As the experiment had approached its conclusion, the results had become clear. The experimental virus had not achieved the desired outcome. With a sinking feeling, Elizabeth knew that her experiment had gone terribly wrong. She turned her gaze toward the laboratory door, and horror washed over her as she realized what was happening. The screams from outside, and the clawing hands were right behind the door. Finally, the door gave way, and a horde of terrifying creatures poured inside. Their numbers were so great that Dr. Turner had no chance of escaping. Amongst the hands grasping in the darkness and the half-decayed faces, more of the dead were being reanimated inside the laboratory. Elizabeth desperately retreated, but these horrifying creatures were closing in on her. Their merciless red eyes bore into her with an eerie intensity, and in that moment, the doctor's face twisted in terror. Dr. Elizabeth Turner's screams pierced through the silence of the laboratory as she realized the horrors of reality. She was now trapped in a world of the living dead, and the terrible zombie outbreak, accidentally initiated by a scientist, could spell the end of the world. As she approached the exit, she reached out her hand towards the door handle and held her breath. She waited for the door to open, with the approaching zombies right behind her. And then, at that moment, the door swung open, and Dr. Turner burst outside, using every ounce of her remaining strength. She managed to slam the door shut, trapping the zombies inside. Once outside, she witnessed the chaos that had spread. The streets were filled with blood and lifeless bodies. She saw that other laboratory workers had also fallen victim to the relentless zombies. Her sole purpose was to stay alive and stop this deadly outbreak. Her top priority was to secure the laboratory and prevent the spread of information, using the emergency communication device she had prepared in advance. She sent out warnings to other scientists, urging them to take safety measures around the outbreak. Then, she began to formulate a plan to reduce the number of the reanimated corpses inside the laboratory. She gathered a group of surviving laboratory workers, and they started scavenging for anything they could find to defend themselves, while trying to understand how the lethal virus had spread. They also worked tirelessly to bring the outbreak under control. However, as time passed, things became increasingly difficult for Dr. Turner and the other survivors. The number of zombies continued to rise, and the city was decaying rapidly. They needed to find more strength and resources to defend themselves. Dr. Turner continued to ponder how to reverse the virus, and fought on with the last shreds of hope to stop this horrifying outbreak. But the harsh reality was that the virus she had accidentally unleashed was on the brink of conquering the world. Unless they found a way to end this nightmare, humanity might lose all hope. Time was running out for Dr. Elizabeth Turner and the surviving individuals. The number of the dead was increasing, and the city was descending into a nightmare. However, Dr. Turner had not lost her faith that the virus could be reversed. She continued her work on some samples she had taken with her while escaping from the laboratory. After long and grueling days, Dr. Turner and her team discovered a weakness in the virus. They began developing an antibody that could potentially stop the virus. However, their time was running out, and keeping the dead at bay was becoming increasingly difficult. Eventually, the reanimated corpses under the influence of the virus reached the laboratory door. Dr. Turner and her team took one final effort to defend the laboratory. With eyes filled with despair, they continued to work desperately in the hope of correcting the devastating consequences of their science. After several hours of intense effort, they finally succeeded in producing the antibody. Dr. Turner took the first dose of the antibody and was freed from the virus's grip. However, outside, the number of the dead was steadily increasing, and the laboratory door had begun to deteriorate. Dr. Turner and her team retreated to a secure area within the laboratory. After preparing the antibody, the effect of the antibody gradually spread, and the reanimated corpses reverted to lifeless forms. The zombie outbreak had come to an end, but the scars on the city and the world ran deep. Dr. Turner had seen how destructive the unchecked power of science could be, and realized the great responsibility she bore for the consequences of this experiment. The zombie outbreak had come to an end, but the scars of this nightmare would not fade for the survivors for a long time. Dr. Turner and her team had realized the danger posed by humanity's scientific discoveries. They now had to use their knowledge more cautiously, because one wrong step could lead to disaster for the world. So, Dr. Turner and the other scientists, though they had survived, carried the indelible marks of a nightmare they would never forget, and they had taken a step toward better understanding the limits of science for the sake of humanity. After the zombie outbreak had ended, Dr. Elizabeth Turner and the surviving scientists began working on the reconstruction of cities and the world. However, they had come face to face with the harsh reality that they could not erase. The unchecked use of science had nearly brought about the end of the world. The world had been rescued from the devastation of the zombie invasion, but infrastructure had crumbled and resources had been depleted. The survivors came together to form communities and did their best to create safe zones and assist fellow survivors. Dr. Turner continued to examine the notes in her laboratory to understand how the virus had emerged and why it had not been reversed. She was determined to find out why the horrifying experiment had failed. Eventually, she discovered a missing piece of data. She had made a mistake, and that mistake had caused the virus to spiral out of control. Once she understood her error, she began developing a new antibody. This time, she and her team conducted more tests and experiments to create a stronger antibody. With the help of other scientists, they finally found a solution. The process of reconstruction was arduous, but the survivors came together and worked in solidarity to make the world a habitable place. Once more, the new antibody developed by Dr. Turner successfully brought the virus under control, and the zombie outbreak never returned. Years passed, and the world finally returned to normalcy. Science had learned the lessons from the horrifying experiment. Dr. Turner and other scientists worked diligently for the betterment of humanity by using their scientific discoveries more cautiously. While the zombie outbreak was remembered as a nightmare, people had come together to overcome this disaster. The world had been rebuilt, stronger and more conscientious. Perhaps most importantly, people had learned the responsibility of wielding the power of science. The world had left behind the terrifying days of the zombie outbreak. Survivors had joined forces to rebuild humanity, and this time, they had decided to use the power of science more judiciously. Dr. Elizabeth Turner and other scientists continued their work for the benefit of humanity by subjecting their experiments to greater scrutiny. With time, cities began to thrive again. Science, technology, and solidarity aided people in restoring their lives to normalcy. However, there were lessons that would not be forgotten. It was essential not to tread the dangerous paths of science and to avoid jeopardizing the future of humanity. The zombie outbreak had revealed people's ability to help one another and showcase their resilience. Survivors, working together, had turned the world into a habitable place once more. Education, healthcare services, and security measures became top priorities in the reconstruction process. Dr. Turner had come to understand how powerless it could be to push the boundaries of science. However, at the same time, She believed that science could also offer solutions to humanity's problems. As scientists, they carried the responsibility of using the power of knowledge conscientiously. The world had begun to flourish once more. After the horrifying zombie outbreak, people had not forgotten the pain brought by that dark period, but they were also moving forward towards a future filled with unity and hope. They had embarked on a new beginning, and this time, science and humanity would walk hand in hand.